Hello everyone, welcome back to Etc. And today we have another brand new Etc. Space Program video. Today we are going to Ike. Yes, that is right. Duna's moon, Ike. What is essentially Phobos and Deimos in real life, combined, smashed together to make a larger moon orbiting what's the equivalent to Mars. So that is our mission today. I was going to intend to do a Duna mission, but I didn't want to do the whole rendezvous thing, and I'm just not very good at docking yet. So I decided to go for Ike instead and not have to do any docking or anything. So the rocket is a bit overkill, but you'll see. Here is the lander / return vehicle. I got the landing legs, of course, and then all the science goodies and whatnot. The upper stage with a swivel engine underneath powering it, so takeoff is easy and getting around is easy as well, because I was unsure if the Terrier engine would do the job. And on top of those Oscar B fuel tanks, I put engine intakes just because they look cool, not because they serve any functional purpose. And we got that shiny Communitron there, the radar dish, so we can, I guess, use the science stuff, because we're bringing along Bob, so we can reset the science to get even more science, and at the same time, actually do maneuver nodes. So that's why we have the shiny dish there. And then now we're making our nuclear transfer stage, which is slightly very overkill. So just putting on all the nuclear engines, the nerve engines, and then putting on decoupler and fairing around it. Kind of struggled with this here, because I put the big decoupler on instead of the small decoupler, and it messed with the fairing building. So I just decided, haha, no, and then went with the smaller one, but there we go. Now I go for the smaller one and then put around the fairing, because it looks a lot nicer and sleeker to have the fairing rather than the fuselages. And I made it gold and metal, and it kind of looks like a bullet, so I called it the Silver Bullet. One thing that you may notice, though, is that I have not all 100% stock textures. I installed the waterfall mod, which makes much nicer engine plumes, more realistic engine plumes. And I added the restock mod, which makes stuff look a bit more realistic, but still Kerbal-ish, so it's not 100% realism, but still has that Kerbal vibe to it, so some things may not be exact, like, as you can see, those mainsail engines don't have that shiny plating, but it serves the exact same purpose. It just looks a little bit more realistic and a bit nicer. Same thing when you go up, like, the science parts and the Communitron's a bit different, looks a bit nicer in my opinion. The nuclear engines look a bit nicer. Here I'm strutting everything to the nuclear engines, and the struts were bugging out for whatever reason. I just wanted to strut them together so there was no Kraken attack. And some of the sciences are a little bit different, given they look cooler and kind of funnier. You'll see once we start running some of the sciences in the Duna system. And here you can see me struggling with the snap function, which is always an annoyance. But this lower stage here is slightly very overpowered. The entire rocket is slightly very overpowered. I did not need nearly as much Delta V to get to Ike, but I did it anyways. I have basically mainsail engines, and then vector engines, and then mammoth engines in the middle, with the fuel lines all going in towards that big orange fuel tank. With the mammoth engines, slightly overpowered, and then it goes to a nuclear transfer stage, a very large one at that, which has a crap ton of Delta V that's completely unnecessary to get to Duna, of all places. And then I have the lander with the swivel engine, lander slash Reed getting back to Kerbin, the return vehicle. So, slightly very overpowered, but I didn't know how much it would be to get that lander to have enough Delta V to come back as well, as I didn't want to do docking. So, it was better to overcompensate, and I think we had a good amount of Delta V left. But now switching on over to the tracking station, we're just basically time warping to get a nice Duna transfer window, which is about 45 degrees from Duna to the sun to Kerbin. Now going to crossfade on over to the launch pad, press Z and T, throttle up, and there we are for launch. A bit slow as there's a lot of fuel, a lot of stuff to be carried, but just speed up the footage, not a big issue. So going for your standard gravity turn maneuver, a little bit steeper because it's a bit heavier, just decoupling those side vector engine fuel tanks and the engines themselves, leaving us with the mainsail engines, but trying to hold steady at the 45 degrees mark to get a nice gravity turn, although it's a very heavy, unnecessary payload. So I'm trying to go for a steeper ascent profile, although we have more than enough oomph to get there. Just going for about, there go the side boosters, just going for about 85,000 meters, and then circularizing. It's just a standard gravity turn, nothing special, but basically just tapping on the engines very, very little, so I could actually flip on over to the maneuver node on the nav ball, as the gimbal on the Mammoth engines are not astounding, especially on something this massive with still a lot of fuel in the lower stage. It would have not gotten there, so I just put it to the lowest notch and got it to flip on over. Now just running our engines at full speed, or full thrust, not speed, to circularize around Kerbin, even though they're Mammoth engines, which are the strongest engines in the game, I believe. Either them or Vector engines. Still, it took a while with this ludicrous payload. Now I'm going to just drag out our prograde marker on the navball slash maneuver node to basically just go at the very edge of Kerbin's influence, and then we'll do a second burn to get to Duna, as it's more accurate this way, and I think more efficient as well. Maybe, don't quote me on that. It's just easier, and you don't... actually, it is more efficient, because you're not doing one long burn, and you're spending more time burning at apoapsis or periapsis, rather than spending more time on either side. So it is more efficient. Yeah, I am correct. So it's better to do a shorter burn to basically get almost all the way out of Kerbin's gravity well, and then burn, go around, come back to periapsis, and then do your burn to whichever celestial body you want to go to. But there goes our bottom stage. Sadly, I had to get rid of the silver fairing, and just running our nuclear engines to extend it to the end. And I had a bit of a heart attack there as we were getting some pesky mud encounters. And for the 100-some hours that I've played this game, anytime I try to go interplanetary, the mud tries to mess with me. But no worry, got our nice Duna encounter on our maneuver node. Not too difficult with that pristine transfer window. So just had to drag out on prograde and we got there. But now going to time warp all the way up to apoapsis and then come back down so we can do our maneuver. Gotta make sure we're actually pointing towards the maneuver. The nuclear engines don't have amazing gimbal, especially, like I said, a payload that's probably not necessary whatsoever. So it took a bit of time, so I physical time warped instead. And now running our engines for, our Duna encounter, and whoop, I overshot it a bit. The maneuver node maker was slightly off. What it said, it was like maybe 20 meters per second delta V over, so overshot Duna a bit, just going retrograde instead, just tapping on retrograde, and there we, ooh, oh, I got a Mun encounter, of course I did, yeah, that's when I had a heart attack, almost got stuck with a Mun encounter, when the encounter nodes for Duna were so close, but no worries, got our Duna encounter there. Now going to just make a little maneuver node to, I guess, get in that ballpark, get closer to Duna, I guess, to make the Oberth effect have more effect. When we slow down and capture ourselves in the Duna system, given not a big issue, but wanted to get that horizontal or that equatorial pass, as it makes it much easier to get an encounter with Ike. But just warping on over to node, gimbling a bit, and then, whoop, still gotta warp over a wee bit, and then just tapping on our engines, even though they're nuclear engines. They still, at interplanetary speeds, it doesn't take a lot to change it. And sadly, we have to get rid of the gold fairing to extend our commutron so we can actually make maneuver nodes now and delete them because it's super annoying. Now just making maneuver to capture at Duna, because if not, we would just go flying by, and to make it easy to get an Ike encounter. So there we have it. Just got our maneuver node plotted out, facing towards maneuver. Gotta make sure SAS is facing that way. And then just warping into the Duna system. Whoop, bit of lag. Sometimes if you're going at interplanetary speeds and then it tries to slow you down to 50 times speed, time warp-wise, it just lags. But now going to run science from high above Duna, because haven't got that yet. And here you can see the slightly different science textures, like the mystery goo there has actual purple goo in it. Trying to zoom in because I noticed that I covered the battery with, I covered the thermometer with the battery, and here the magnometer boom looks really cool with the restock because it almost looks like it has that double helix when it pops out and curls right back in. It's really cool. I love it. So there's that. Now just going to restore the Science Junior module. The Science Junior module is pretty cool. It almost looks like my room almost. Just a lot of nerd geeky stuff in there, and then that's how you run the experiment, by throwing some things at the wall, and wow, it's 0G, shock and awe. It's not much different, but whatever. I like the science restock, like the science texture, science whatever. The science modules restock because they look cool. Now just doing our burn at Duna, periapsis to capture at Duna. So not a super big burn, only 300 some meters per second. Though it's not even a dent in our Delta V budget. Have a slightly ludicrous amount of Delta V. You can see 9,000 meters per second of Delta V when we were at Kerbin. Had almost 10,000 meters per second of Delta V. That's way more than we will ever need for a Duna mission, unless you're doing something like I'm doing, where you're chicken and don't know how to rendezvous. But now, apparently I was going to get an Ike encounter regardless in the next orbit, so I just tweaked it a little bit to make it so we won't crash into Ike, so can circularize and land safely instead of plummeting into the surface like a missile. So I thought, because we were slightly past Periapsis, I thought I could run the engines and then do it, but it didn't work, so on the next pass, I did it. So, now we're running science from space near Duna as the new biome, more science to take. Of course, with the beautifully new restocked science parts. So just going to do that. Running all the reports, scanning all the scans to get all the nice science. And gotta say, with Scatera, the visual mod that I have installed, Duna looks beautiful. Like, that atmospheric glow looks almost realistic. It's incredibly cool, and the clouds and whatnot look so good. To all the people who made the mod, very, very nice job. But with all the science from high above, or near Duna, space near Duna, done, going to just face node. Forgot to turn on solar panels. Haven't seen those restocked yet. They're not as good. I don't think. They look kind of odd. But just warping back down to Periapsis, warping right around. See, on the next pass, I got the icon counter, because apparently I was going to get that regardless, weirdly enough. Well, luckily enough, it's like no finagling with anything, though. Ike has a pretty large gravity well. It's like similar to the Mun, I believe, smaller than, it's like in between the Mun and Minmus. So, not too difficult to get there. But now in Ike's sphere of influence, going to run all the science again from space high above Ike, because more science, more good stuff. Still don't have the text tree fully unlocked, and I want to get the aerospike engines for doing a Duna mission, as they're more efficient, and I don't want to do the whole docking rendezvous thing. So yeah, I wanted to get the aerospike engines, so doing the Ike mission first, and getting all the science from around Duna before we actually land on Duna. As I've said, the goal for this series is to land on every celestial body besides asteroids. Yeah, see? The Science Junior looks really cool. Every celestial body in this game besides asteroids and comets. And yeah, land on all of them and just kind of showcase them, because we have the Outer Planets mod installed, and I still really haven't finagled around with it either. But back to what's happening on screen, just performing our retrograde burn to capture at Ike, making it nice and easy for us to land, slowing us down to only 300 meters per second instead of like 1,000, which would not be nice. But now, again, running science from space near Ike this time. Gotta get all that science. Magnometer boom. Magnometer boom. Yeah, that's how you say it. Always looks super cool. Extending, and the Science Junior module looks really funny. It's just like what a stereotypical nerd room looks like. It's amazing. I can relate. But now just extending our Communitron once again to get maneuvers again. Kind of annoying, but realistic. I get it. Though having control locked, not super great. Here I fired retrograde, thinking, I don't know, to get on the light side, I want to land on the light side. Just because it looks nicer on YouTube and I can see where I'm landing, making it 20 times easier. But realized too low, so fired prograde. Took a while to flip around, and then warp to Periapsis. Whoop! And then fired retrograde, and made sure our end intersected with the ground. That's as standard as it gets. Now just retracting all the solar panels, because don't want them to get bashed and bruised. But just going to use up all the juice that we can in the interplanetary transfer stage, if you want to call it that. The nuclear stage, which has about 5,000 meters per second of delta V left, so slowing down is not an issue at all, though the nuclear engines don't have too much oomph. I didn't want to land on them, so that's why I had the lander with the swivel engine, because I was unsure how big Ike's gravity well actually was, because I've only landed on it once, and that was iffy. But using the nuclear engine, or nuclear engines, to slow us all the way down, and kind of a waste of a lot of delta V, just jettisoned those, detached it, and got our lander stage, and those just smashed into the ground, the nuclear stage. And then here I realized on the nav wall, I was still set to orbit instead of surface, and I was firing retrograde compared to orbit, meaning I was just going upwards. But, oddly enough, I got a really good suicide burn when I just switched to surface. It was like perfectly timed or whatever, so worked out very well, most Kerbal thing ever. But now you can see, from the debris of the nuclear stage that smashed into the surface, the fuselages just kind of broke apart, and you can see the one sad little Mark I fuselage rolling on over to our lander. Thought that was hilarious. It's just the most Kerbal thing ever to have almost crashing into the surface, but at the last second performing a beautiful suicide burn completely on accident. Here, just running all the science from the surface of Ike to, get science and whatnot. And then your lower stage that has ludicrous amounts of delta V still left, smash into the surface, and have its remains almost just wipe out the legs of your lander. I was kind of nervous that would happen, just that fuselage would wipe out the legs and the thing would go tumbling over. Would have been hilarious, but would have sucked, and I would have to re-land again. Would have been a bit annoying, but everything worked out, got a nice landing, and once again, Parallax mod, the textures look absolutely amazing. The rocks adds the tessellation, looks incredibly cool. But now going to plant our first Ike flag, and going to name it First Ike Landing, of course. First Ike Landing, and plaque text, tribute to Ike's Doughboys. If anybody out there knows what Ike's Doughboys is, good for you. And to those of you who don't, or don't know what a doughboy is, you are completely missing out on one of the best joys of life. And now here, moving swiftly along, I kind of wanted to hit the fuel tank or fuselage just to see what would happen, and I got nervous automatically that it would have, smashed into the lander and just stopped immediately. So just getting back onto the lander with Bob, after taking his surface sample and EVA report, getting back on to the lander so we can leave, making sure to save the game here so I can go back and take the wonderful thumbnail that all of you clicked on, hopefully. Hopefully that's why you clicked on. And then just retracting the ladders, bringing back up the radar dish, and turning back on SAS, firing our engine, and saying, Ike, gotta head out. I wanted to say that so long. But no atmosphere on Ike. Can basically just go horizontal immediately. Don't have to have a very steep ascent profile. Just making a bit of a maneuver to not exactly circularize, as you don't really need to. Its gravity isn't too massive and got a lot of delta V. Just gotta get into orbit around Ike and then into Duna. So retracting the landing legs there. And then just firing our swivel engine. Looks so good. The waterfall textures, must say, the plume on the engine. And instead of just orbiting, I decided to just go all the way. And realized the swivel engine has a lot more oomph than nuclear engines. And kind of got a little bit too close to Duna's atmosphere for comfort. So I just had to fire retrograde a wee bit. But now making our or trying to make our maneuver node to get our return to Kerbin. Although it didn't work out too well. But first, let's leave Ike's sphere of influence. There we go. Ike gotta head out. Still find that hilarious. I have an amazing sense of humor. But because it didn't work out too well, the stars are not aligned, per se. The planets are not aligned. So instead, just time warped for a ideal Duna to Kerbin transfer window, which is about, I think, 75 degrees with Duna ahead of Kerbin. So made it a whole lot easier. But you may see a flicker or two of the encounter, I guess, sign. I got 1 or 2 gravity assists from Ike, I believe, funnily enough, extending my apoapsis and periapsis in the Duna system, making it easier or more efficient, requiring less delta V to extend and get our return to Kerbin burn. So that was fun. Just a stroke of luck, I guess. Funny. Helped out, though. Did not intend to get a gravity assist from Ike, but sure did work. But now doing our burn to shrink our periapsis around the sun to intersect with Kerbin's sphere of influence, and there we have it. Now going to, I put it at apoapsis, the maneuver. It should be at, I think, I don't know what the most efficient point is. I think it's in the middle of whichever way you're going to, I guess, shrink your orbit in accordance to a celestial body. But just going to basically use anti-normal and normal to bring it up, and then the radial ins and radial outs to get it close enough to the atmosphere. So once we get into Kerbin's sphere of influence, doing the whole radial in, radial out, to get into the atmosphere, and aerobrake won't be too big of a deal. So there we are, just 500,000 meters above the surface, and making that maneuver at the tippity top of our orbit or trajectory around Kerbin, right before we encounter to actually intersect with the atmosphere to aerobrake. Like I said, a little bit nervous as we're coming in at interplanetary speeds and didn't want to go too low, but it ends out interestingly. That's all I'll say. You gotta watch re-entry, because usually re-entry is pretty straightforward. This one was not straightforward in any stretch of the imagination. But just did that burn to go radial in, get closer, and fine-tune that atmospheric trajectory. And we still had 1,000 meters per second of delta V left. Fired that swivel engine to slow ourselves down a bit more. It was probably saving grace. As you can see here, for whatever reason, the decoupler got stuck on the heat shield, and the upper stage with the capsule and the science, basically payload service bay, got stuck on the lower stage. And the heat shield was basically stuck on there, and I'm tumbling into the atmosphere like a missile, though slowing myself down with the swivel engine was probably the saving grace, otherwise I would have exploded. But I kind of pulled a China here with the Long March 5B almost. Given it worked out fine-ish, I just kind of went into circles with the SAS wheels to shake off that lower stage for whatever reason it was stuck. Got the parachutes nice and safe and sound deployed. Now we're just falling on down to the surface. I just thought that was hilarious, the whole plummeting towards Earth, still with the lower stage on. Kind of scary at the same time. I thought everything was going to overheat and explode, but slowing myself down with the swivel engine turned out to be the saving grace with the extra delta V. Everything worked out fine and dandy, but there we go, landed and recovered. Got a whopping 4,311 science from the mission, as it is a new system we visited anyways. But going into R&D to unlock some more of the tech tree, let's get some field science, as I want to experiment with rovers, because I don't want to just do landing and then going up and coming back. It's kind of lame and gets repetitive after a while, although it's kind of boring, but getting the hypersonic flight for those aerospike engines that I talked about earlier, getting that field science to get rovers to experiment with, as I do have the Breaking Grounds DLC to do the whole funny rock finding and scanning. Got the bigger Communitron dishes, so when we go out far to the outer planets, can still get signal. Just looking at all my options, once it gets further and further on, once you have the big fuel tanks and the nuclear engines, and basically the general stuff that is you can go anywhere in the solar system with, everything else kind of becomes useless-ish. Not useless, just not as important. Got the RTG, though, which is always good, as no longer a need for solar panels and can power ourselves when we go out to, say, Pluto, where the solar panels will be practically ineffective. Well, PLOC, as it's called in outer planets. And then finally just got the precision propulsion and the larger Mark III fuselages, I guess, to save space when making nuclear transfer stages. But that is it for our Ike mission today. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you leave a like below, and make sure you subscribe for more Kerbal Space Program content, hopefully coming out every Saturday or every other Saturday, as next week or the week after I intend to go to Dune, as I've mentioned multiple times in the video. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Signing off for now, and goodbye.